Chairman Comer, you said it in your opening statement and in the letter that you sent to the Rules Committee that you request an appropriate rule for this legislation. What is that?
Appropriate rule that we hold criminals
Is it an open
accountable.
rule or closed rule or amendments, or what is an appropriate rule? What are you asking for?
An appropriate rule.
Well, what is the definition of that?
A rule that is appropriate. This is a rule this is the Rules Committee. We want an appropriate rule to go on the floor to where we can do our job and hold criminals accountable.
What is your opinion, since you put it in your letter and you put it in your opening statement? What is your opinion of what an appropriate rule is? I mean, would an appropriate rule be a closed rule?
Whatever the Rules Committee deems appropriate.
Yeah, well, yeah, you know, that's, then, I mean, because I asked the question because you used the word appropriate. You could have just said, I request a rule, but you said an appropriate rule, and maybe the chair of the Rules Committee can tell us what an appropriate rule is. I'm not, my Republican friends like to use that, but I don't, no one can define it for me. I mean, I don't know what, maybe it's hiding behind one of the statues in the Capitol or something. We can go look for it, but I'm just curious. I mean, you're asking us to bring a bill to the floor, and you ask for an appropriate rule, but you can't define what appropriate is.
I mean, with all due respect, Mr. Reagan-Barber, this is a very serious issue, and I think you're trying to make a joke out of it. And I go through this in Oversight Committee with Raskin's little lapdog Moskowitz, but you know, the people in Washington D.C. are furious with this out-of-control crime in Washington D.C. The House Oversight Committee has legislative jurisdiction over Washington D.C., and we are trying to do what the people want and make this city safe for its residents and all the millions of tourists that come here every year.
Well, anyway, I appreciate that, and I just want the record to reflect that you use a word in your letter and in your testimony that you can't define, which, you know,
I did define it.
Yeah, you just said appropriate means appropriate.
Good afternoon. Our nation's law enforcement officers are reeling after years of coordinated effort to defund and demoralize them by radical Democrats. Indeed, calls to defund and distrust the police have been bolstered by voices in this very chamber. Even Vice President Harris has applauded these efforts on the campaign trail and urged her supporters to bail out individuals who plunged Minneapolis into chaos and caused upwards of $350 million in destruction. In 2024, crime is still rampant across the country. Look no further than right here in the nation's capital. From 2022 to 2023, violent crime in D.C. increased by 37% and robberies increased by 65%. In that same time frame, motor vehicle thefts rose 107%. Longtime residents, new arrivals, visitors, government staffers, and even members of Congress have all been impacted. To cut down on crime, you have to catch criminals and bring them to justice. To do that, we need strong local police forces. But our law enforcement officers find themselves in a dangerous position. Thanks to the left's absurd movement to demonize police, many offices are understaffed and lack sufficient resources. Now they are facing increased risk, direct threats to their safety because of their profession, and all with reduced manpower. Additionally, we will consider one item in support of Israel in its continued fight against Hamas, Iran, and the Houthis. When President Biden made the decision to withhold weapons shipments to our greatest friend, major non-NATO ally, and lone democracy in the region, he usurped congressional authority. Once again, he signaled to hostile actors under his leadership, America does not pose a serious threat to their mission. Israel deserves nothing less than our full and steadfast support while they wrestle with a myriad number of threats to their continued existence. The Israeli Security Assistance Support Act rebukes President Biden's unilateral decision to pause arms transfer, ensure prompt delivery of the transfers, and reasserts congressional support for Israel.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and wow, after that opening statement. Let me just say to anybody who's watching this hearing on C-SPAN, please don't let the chair's comments dissuade you from coming to visit the nation's capital? Thousands and thousands and thousands of people come to this building, this Capitol building, every single day to learn about our history, to meet with their members of Congress, and they do so without incident. So please don't be frightened away from coming to visit Washington or talking to your representatives. It is National Police Week, which means we are back with several messaging bills that do absolutely nothing to actually keep people safe and instead highlight the Republican Party's total hypocrisy when it comes to law enforcement. Many of the measures before us today demonize migrants and continue to push Republicans' tired, unconstructive, and baseless attacks on President Biden. It's sad and a total waste of time. But let's be honest, that's what Republicans are good at. Now, let me remind everyone, there was a comprehensive bipartisan border security bill in the Senate. If House Republicans wanted to take action on the border, they had a chance. Instead, they killed it. And when we have a non-binding resolution to support law enforcement and oppose efforts, and then we have a non-binding resolution to support law enforcement and impose efforts to, quote, defund the police. This resolution is almost comical, considering just last month, the Republican Study Committee, which all but one of my Republican friends across the dais are proud members of, released a proposal to gut the Community-Oriented Policing Services Program, the COPS program, which provides grants that support hiring, retaining, and training officers. And that just scratches the surface. 21 Republicans, including 3 members of this committee, voted against awarding police officers the Congressional Gold Medal for their service on January 6th. And I noticed in the chair's opening statement, not a mention of the Capitol Police officers who protected all of us and our staff on January 6th. Over a dozen Republicans voted to fire 2,000 Customs and Border Patrol police officers in May 2022, including 3 Republican members on this committee. And over 50 Republicans voted to cut federal support for local law enforcement agencies in September 2022. They voted to fire 400 cops and cut crime prevention grants by an average of $1 million per state. Republican members have called to abolish the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the ATF. So as I see it, the only political party in Congress actively defunding and challenging the police is the GOP. Now, meanwhile, Democrats want to keep communities safe. We want to address gun violence in our schools, an issue I hear from police officers all the time, but yet silence from my Republican colleagues. We want to invest in programs that get to the root causes of crime. We want to make sure that police aren't put in situations that they aren't trained to handle. And we know the key to improving safety in our neighborhoods is not to use law enforcement officers like political pawns. Now, sadly, that is what every single one of these law enforcement-related bills does. Additionally, before us is a bill called the Israel Security Assistance Support Act. This radical bill would cripple our national security apparatus and run counter to longstanding policy and law. This bill basically gets rid of human rights checks and balances already in place on arms transfers. And it would interfere with any administration's ability to comply with U.S. obligations under international human rights and humanitarian law. And by the way, 3 U.S. presidents have threatened to pause military aid to Israel. 3 Republican presidents, Dwight Eisenhower, Ronald Reagan, and George H.W. Bush. And all three times it happened during a moment of crisis. And this should not be a partisan issue. It should be obvious that if you want U.S. military assistance, it doesn't come with no strings attached. If our taxpayers are paying for it, they ought to know that it's not being used in a way that runs counter to our laws and our values. And Madam Chair, let me just say, you know, we can be friends with Israel while also expressing our anger and frustration with the policies of the Netanyahu government. His bombing has been, in my opinion, indiscriminate and wrong. And I, for one, think we ought to tell him that we don't support his decision to invade Rafah, one of the most heavily populated areas in Gaza. We are talking about tens of thousands of civilian casualties, over 1 million people hungry. Where is our humanity? And I don't care what country kills civilians. It is wrong. It is against U.S. law to use our weapons to violate international humanitarian laws. And by the way, we do have a law that says that if a country frustrates the delivery of humanitarian aid to civilians in a conflict, that basically we are to freeze that aid. There's a famine happening right now in Gaza that it is amazing to me that so many of my friends on the other side of the aisle seem indifferent to. And there are people who are literally on the verge of starvation who have nothing to do with Hamas, who have nothing to do with any violence against the Israeli civilian population or against anybody. And so at some point, we have to make sure that what we send to any country in the world is not being used in a way that, quite frankly, violates international humanitarian law, our own law, and our own values. So I, again, regret that that's what we're going to spend our time with on the floor this week. But again, my friends are in control, and it really is quite sad what we're seeing unfold here. And with that, I yield back.